So I've decided to read some fairy tales to help me just as much as anyone else at this moment. I have Andrew Lang, A World of Fairy Tales, illustrated by Henry Justice Ford. I bought the second hand and the copyright is 1994, or the author seems to have been born in 1844, so I'm not sure how that worked out. But I have a story from Armenia. It is He Wins Who Waits. I've never read the story before, so it'll be a surprise to me as well. Once upon a time, there reigned a king who had an only daughter. The girl had been spoiled by everybody from her birth, and besides being beautiful, was clever and willful, and when she grew old enough to be married, she refused to have anything to do with the prince whom her father favored, but declared that she would choose a husband for herself. By long experience, the king knew that once she had made up her mind, there was no expecting her to change it, so he inquired meekly what she wished him to do. "Summon all the young men in the kingdom to appear before me a month from today," answered the princess. "The one to whom I shall give this golden apple shall be my husband." "But, my dear," began the king in tones of dismay. "The one to whom I shall give this golden apple shall be my husband," repeated the princess in a louder voice than before, and the king understood the signal, and with a sign proceeded to do her bidding. The young men arrived, tall and short, dark and fair, rich and poor. They stood in rows in the great courtyard in front of the palace, and the princess, clad in robes of green, with a golden veil flowing behind her, passed before them all, holding the apple. Once or twice she stopped and hesitated, but in the end she always passed on, till she came to a youth near the end of the last row. There was nothing especially remarkable about him, the bystanders thought, nothing that was likely to take a girl's fancy. 100 others were handsomer, and all wore finer clothes, but he met the princess's eyes frankly and with a smile, and she smiled too, and held out the apple. "There is some mistake," cried the king, who had anxiously watched her progress, and hoped that none of the candidates would please her. "It is impossible that she can wish to marry the son of a poor widow, who has not a farthing in the world. Tell her that I will not hear of it, and that she must go through the rows again and fix upon someone else." So the princess went through the rows a second and a third time, and on each occasion she gave the apple to the widow's son. "Well, marry him if you will," exclaimed the angry king, "but at least you shall not stay here." And the princess answered nothing, but threw up her hand, and taking the widow's son by the hand, they left the castle. That evening they were married, and after the ceremony they went back to the house of the bridegroom's mother, which in the eyes of the princess did not look much bigger than a hen house. The old woman was not at all pleased when her son entered, bringing his bride with him. "As if we were not poor enough before," she grumbled. "I dare say this is some fine lady who can do nothing to earn her living." But the princess stroked her arm and said softly, Sandhill cranes, I just heard. She stroked her arm and said softly, "Do not be vexed, dear mother. I am a famous spinner, and can sit at my wheel all day without breaking a thread." And she kept her word, but in spite of the efforts of all three, they became poorer and poorer, and at the end of 6 months it was agreed that the husband should go to the neighboring town to get work. Here he met a merchant who was about to start on a long journey with a train of camels laden with the goods of all sorts, and needed a man to help him. The widow's son begged that he take him as a servant, and to this the merchant assented, giving him his whole year's salary beforehand. The young man returned home with the news, and the next day bade farewell to his mother and to his wife, who were very sad at parting from him. "Do not forget me while you are absent," whispered the princess as she flung her arms around his neck. "And as you pass by the well which lies near the city gate, stop and greet the old man you will find sitting there. Kiss his hand, and then ask him what counsel he can give you for your journey." Then the youth set out, and when he reached the well where the old man was sitting, he asked the question as his wife had bidden him. "My son," replied the old man, "you have done well to come to me, and in return remember 3 things. She whom the heart loves is ever the most beautiful. Patience is the first step on the road to happiness. He wins who waits." The young man thanked him and went on his way. Early the next morning the caravan set out, and before sunset it had arrived at the first halting place, around some wells, where another company of merchants had already encamped. But no rain had fallen for a long while in that rocky country, and both men and beasts were parched with thirst. To be sure, there was another well, about half a mile away, where there was always water, but to get to it you had to be lowered deep down, and no one who had ever descended that well had been known to come back. However, till they could store more water in their bags of goatskin, the caravans dared not go further into the desert, and on the night of the arrival of the widow's son and his master, the merchants had decided to offer a large reward to anyone who was brave enough to go down into the enchanted well and bring some up. Thus it happened that at sunrise the young man was aroused from his sleep by a herald making his round of the camp, proclaiming that every merchant present would give 1,000 gold coins to the man who would risk his life to bring water for themselves and their camels. The youth hesitated for a long while when he heard of the proclamation. The story of the well had spread far and wide, and long ago had reached his ears. The danger was great, he knew, but then, if he came back alive, he would be the possessor of 80,000 gold coins. He turned to the herald who was passing the tent. "I will go," he said. "What madness!" cried his master, who happened to be standing near. "You are too young to throw away your life like that. Run after the herald and tell him you take back your offer." But the young man shook his head, and the merchant saw that it was useless to try and persuade him. "Well, it is your own affair," he observed at last. "If you must go, you must. Only, if you ever return, I will give you a camel's load of goods, and my best meal besides." And he touched his turban in a token of farewell. He entered the tent. Hardly had he done so than a crowd of men were seen pouring out of the camp. "How can we thank you?" they exclaimed, pressing around the youth. "Our camels as well as ourselves are almost dead of thirst. See, here is the rope we have brought to let you down." "Come then," answered the youth, and they all set out. On reaching the well, the rope was knotted securely under his arms. A big goatskin bottle was given to him, and he was gently lowered to the bottom of the pit. Here a clear stream was bubbling over the rocks, and stooping down, he was about to drink, when a huge Arab appeared before him, saying in a loud voice, "Come with me." The young man rose, never doubting that his last hour had come. But as he could do nothing, he followed the Arab into a brilliantly lit hall on the far side of the little river. There his guide sat down, and drawing toward him 2 boys, he said to the stranger, "I have a question to ask you. If you answer it right, your life shall be spared. If not, your head will be forfeit, and the head of many other has been before you. Tell me, which of my 2 children do I think the handsomer?" The question did not seem a hard one, for while one boy was as beautiful a child as ever was seen, his brother was exceedingly ugly. But just as the youth was going to speak, the old man's counsel flashed into the youth's mind, and he replied hastily, "The one whom we love best is always the handsomest." "You have saved me," cried the Arab, rising quickly from his seat and pressing the young man in his arms. "Ah, if you could only guess what I have suffered from the stupidity of all the people to whom I have put this question, and I was condemned by a wicked genius, it says genius, to remain here until it was answered. But what brought you to this place, and how can I reward you for what you have done for me?" "By helping me to draw enough water for my caravan of 80 merchants and their camels who are dying for want of it," replied the youth. "That is easily done," said the Arab. "Take these 3 apples, and when you have filled your skin and are ready to be drawn up, lay one of them on the ground, halfway to the earth. Let fall another, and at the top drop the 3rd. If you follow my directions, no harm will happen to you. And take besides these 3 pomegranates, green, red, and white. One day you will find a use for them." The young man did as he was told and stepped out into the rocky waste, where the merchants were anxiously awaiting him. Ah, how thirsty they all were! But even after the camels had drunk, the skin seemed full as ever. Full of gratitude for their deliverance, the merchants pressed the money into his hands, while his own master bade him choose what goods he liked, and a mule to carry them. So the widow's son was rich at last, and when the merchant had sold his merchandise and returned home to his native city, the servant hired a man by whom he sent the money and the mule back to his wife. "I will send the pomegranates also," he thought, "for if I leave them in my turban, they may some day fall out." And he drew them out of his turban. But the fruit had vanished, and in their places were 3 precious stones, green, red, and white. For a long time he remained with the merchant, who gradually trusted him with all of his business, and gave him a large share of the money he made. When his master died, the young man wished to return home, but the widow begged him to stay and help her. And one day he awoke with a start to remember that 20 years had passed since he had gone away. "I want to see my wife," he said the next morning to his mistress. "If at any time I can be of use to you, send a messenger to me. Meanwhile, I have told Hassan what to do." And mounting the camel, he set out. So there are several more pages, and I'm seeing low battery here. So this will be part 1.